All right, guys, we're going to take a look at the next section here. So remember, just trying to take as good a notes as possible. This is review, but that does not mean that uh, you remember all these things. So something today that learned pretty early on in chemistry. It's right here, significant figures. So significant figures, guys, something that uh, we have a lot of lab stuff that we want to try to do in here, and the reason for that is that you have an internal assessment, which is a lab research project that you complete and turn in at the end of your senior year, and it's 20% of your overall grade. So we want to make sure that you understand how to do all the pieces so you can be successful on that project. One of those pieces is being able to talk about error and uncertainty and use correct significant figures. So that is a thing that you get scored on in the internal assessment. So something that we look at here. So you can take a look there. We got some notes. I'm going to talk about the rules, and you should write those down, and then we'll do some practice stuff. So first thing is we got this term exact number. So what you want to write down is an exact number is going to be something you do not use significant figures with. And so in a calculation, if you have something that would make your answer not not make sense because it would reduce the significant figures down too far, or something like that. That's an exact number. So exact numbers for you guys are going to be conversion factors. So a conversion factor does not use significant figures. And so let me show you why, and then hopefully what a conversion factor is if you've forgotten. And so a conversion factor a is like when you guys were converting back and forth into moles, things like that, at the end of the semester in the spring, and you're doing some stoichiometry. And so let me go ahead and blow this up a bit. All right. So I'm going to just go ahead and do a quick little example. And so if you had, let's say you had a number, and we'll just make up a number. So you have 26.2, and you've got grams, and you've got grams of carbon. Well, in order to solve a problem, you might need to convert those into moles. So you put moles on top, and you go ahead and put your grams on the bottom, and you'd look up on your handy periodic table, and you'd find out that there are 12.01 grams in a mole. So you would have a problem set up, but what's going to be going on here is that we would use this information to find sig figs. We would not use any of this information. Okay. So you may not remember sig figs, but with significant figures, you are going to be counting significant figures. So when I look at this situation over here on the left, this, I would actually come in from the left. 1, 2, 3. That would be 3 sig figs. Now, over here, you've got a number on top and a number on bottom. So you got three numbers. So this one, well, that's only a single significant figure. So if we used the conversion factor for significant figures, what happens is it would take every single answer to one sig fig. And we don't want to do that. So we just basically ignore the conversion factor when it comes to significant figures. So we still do the math. It's just that this would not be used for significant figures or not be used to count significant figures. It's not that it is a a thing we would just not do at all. We'd still do the math. It's just our final answer would end up with the three significant figures. So something to kind of think about is that this does come up a lot, in the fact that you end up with situations where you're doing stuff just like this. So a lot of times, this is the area over here where we look for the sig figs. So something to think about. Okay, so you're probably like, wow, I can't remember my sig figs very well. Well, we'll help you out. So we've got a couple of things here, and we're going to look at the counting right now. Now you can write down whatever you want there, but I'm going to show you how to do the counting and the multiplying and the dividing through an example. So let me go back over here to my Jamboard here, and we're going to slide over and get a blank slide. And so I'm going to put a couple of examples in here. So let's just make some up. So, got to get rid of the magnifying glass. Here we go. Let's go like 3, 6, 0, 1, 0. And then let's go, that's 36,010. So then let's go like 3, 6, 0, 1, 0.0. Same number. Then let's go like 36000, and then let's finish off with 0.00360. Okay. The thing with significant figures is it's all about whether you have a decimal or not as to where you start counting. And so if we look here, there's a decimal and then there's a decimal. So those two have decimals. So if you have a decimal, what happens is that you start counting from the left side. And so you count from the left if you have a decimal. And so that is something that we will be using right away. All right, there we go. So you could write that in. That is a pretty important thing. So let's go back here and take a look at what we got going on here. So this one has a decimal. So what that means is I'm gonna be counting from the left. This one has a decimal, so I'm counting from the right. Now, if you don't have a decimal, so this one has a decimal counting from the left, this one has a decimal counting from the left. If you don't have a decimal, you count from the right. So we got 2 with and 2 without. So the way the counting works is that when you start counting, you decide which direction to come in from. Decimal left, no decimal right. And then you ignore things that are zeros. And then when you find your first thing that is not a zero, then you're going to go ahead and start counting. So let's flip over to this. So I come in this way on this first one. That's a 0, so I'm going to ignore it. Then I get a 1, so I'm going to start counting there. Once you start counting, you count everything that's left. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 of those are what we call significant, which means they're going to help us determine how many numbers we want in our final answer, or the rounding. Now this one I'm going to come in from the right. And so the first number is not a 0. Well, not a 0. I start counting. So then once I start counting, I just keep going. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That'd be 6 significant figures. This one here, right away, we got a 0. So we can ignore him, ignore this one. So we'd start there at the 6. Only 2 numbers left. We would count them both. Once you start counting, they don't stop. That's always a tricky thing for students. So that'd be 2. And the last one, we're going to ignore, and then we would count. But notice I just count everything, even that 0. So once I start counting, I count it all, and that would be 3 significant figures. So that's sort of that's how you count. So let's go back to your notes. You'll see that there's an example here. We're going to jump down to that example 5, and you've got some counting examples. So let's go ahead and do those real quick. I've put those over on this Jamboard. So let's go over to those. So I've got them right here, and we'll try to blow this up a bit. And we'll zoom in. We'll click off of that. And then there we go. We've got some examples. Okay, so How many significant figures? So let's first decide which direction am I going to be counting from, and then we will determine our answers. Okay, so do I have a decimal or do I not? So this first one here, you'll look, we do have a decimal. So I'm going to come in from the left. This one has a decimal. I'm going to come in from the left. This one does not. So I'm going to come in from the right. And this one does. So I'm going to come in from the left. And so now what we're doing is we're looking at that starting place. Where do we want to start counting our sig figs? That's going to be based upon where we're at. And so this one, this was coming from the left, that one is not a zero. So I'm going to start and I'm going to end up counting everything. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 of them are considered significant. This one coming from the left, same thing, but there's only 4. Notice I count the zeros. Once I start counting, I count everything. This one, we can ignore the first number we hit because it's a 0. Then we'll count the 5 and the 1. And then here we can ignore that and ignore that. And then, oh, there's a 1. So we'll start counting right there. Count everything that's left. And 1502. That's 4 sig figs. Key thing on sig figs, guys, is where do you start? It is all about where that decimal is at. And so when I'm looking at these, the first thing I'm looking at is, okay, these have decimals, and so I'm going to count from the left. This one does not, number 3, so I'm going to end up counting from the right. So I think that's a good way for you guys to kind of start to remember some of